Hi, second grade. Today I'm really excited because we are going to learn about our second type of Native American. And I had such a great time talking about the Powhatan Indians last week that I'm super excited to introduce you to our new Indian study or Native American study, which is the Lakota Indians. So the Lakota Indians are very, very, very different than the Powhatan Indians we talked about last week. They lived in a different region, so their climate was different, their land was different, how they got around was different, their occupations were different, what they ate was different. And that's because even though, they were they're Native Americans just like the Powhatan Indians, their environments were so different. So remember, Native Americans use their environment to shape every aspect of their life. And the Lakota Indians had a completely different environment than the Powhatan Indians. So let's learn more about them. Region are areas that have the same or common characteristics. Last week we learned about the Eastern Woodlands area. This area is the area that the Powhatan Indians lived in. Today we're going to learn about a different region. Today we're learning about the Lakota's region, the region that they lived in, and they lived in the Plains region. The Plains region is very different than the region we learned about last week. And the difference in the region leads the Powhatan Indians and the Lakota Indians to live very different lives. It is the weather over a long period of time. The Plains region is very different than the region we learned about last week. They lived in a place with hot summers and harsh, cold winters. This caused them not to farm as much, but instead they lived solely or really mainly by hunting. Land is the part of Earth's surface that we live on. And we learned last week that it gave Native Americans a lot of different gifts: food to eat, trees to build houses with, and water to drink. Every place has its own special mix of things, and it's provided by the land. Lakota Indians lived, like we said, in the Plains region. The Plains region had flat land, prairies, rolling hills, and different types of grasses. Picture of the plains. The plains are flat areas with some rolling hills. They are often covered by grasses, some tall, some short. Grasses provide food for grazing animals. Just 200 years ago, the lands between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains were home to more than 150,000 American Indians and 60 million buffalo. Environment are the surroundings. Look around where we live. We live in the area of the Eastern Woodlands, which we learned about last week. We had different plants and animals, and the environment in the Plains region is going to be very different than the region we live in and learned about last week. The environment had grasses, filled with lots of different grasses, tall grasses. You can see here in the picture the mix of tall and short grasses and the rolling hills in the far distance. Homes. Let's talk about the homes that the Lakota Indians lived in. It's very different than the Powhatan Indians. Lakota Indians lived in teepees. Here's a picture of a teepee during the winter. Lakota Indians moved a lot to follow the buffalo herds. They lived in easy-to-move teepees made of different animal hides. In winter, the teepees were lined with fur for extra warmth. This is very different than how the Powhatans lived. They lived in long houses. If you remember, they built their long houses out of wood, but you couldn't pick up a long house and move it anywhere. That's why the Lakota chose to live in teepees, so they could pick up their houses and move them anywhere. Transportation. Transportation is a way of moving people and things from one place to another. Last week, when we were talking about the Powhatan Indians, we talked about how they transported themselves and goods using canoes. Do you think the Lakota Indians use canoes too? Canoes, you were wrong. The Lakota Indians transported themselves by horses and by walking, but actually, there were no horses originally in the plains. There were no horses in America until Spanish explorers brought them here in the 1500s. When the Plains Indians first saw horses, they called them sacred dogs. They still do. They quickly learned all about these new creatures and became the best riders in America. Here's a picture of the Lakota Indians riding horses. Having horses made chasing the bison a lot easier. Occupation. This is the job that they held. Lakota Indians were hunters and horsemen. Lakota Indians were amazing hunters. They herded bison over cliffs and into deep pits. They shot the trapped animal with arrows. They were called the buffalo hunters. The Lakota survived by hunting. Because there were no horses in America until the Spanish explorers brought them here in the 1500s, the Plains Indians first hunted by walking or running. Here's a picture of the Lakota Indians hunting once they had horses. These Lakota men were hunting buffalo. They hunt them by herding them. They used the meat for food, the skins for clothes and their teepees, the bones to make tools, and the tendons to make thread and bowstrings. They boiled the hooves to make glue. No part of the buffalo went to waste. Alrighty friends, that was so insightful. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. We're going to talk about the Lakota Indians again later this week on Thursday. So let's check in with our I can statements. We had a couple. The first I can statement is, I can explain how the environment affected the American Indians' choice of homes, occupation, and transportation, which we talked about, which we went through. We talked about all those different aspects, and we discussed how, they lived that way because of their environment and their surroundings. So let's check that off. Number 2, I can explain how American Indian cultures, Eastern Woodlands, Plains, and Southwest. Eastern Woodlands is what we talked about last week. Plains is what we talked about this week. Respected and protected their environment and their homelands. So we get a little small check for that because we did touch on it. We're going to dive more into both of these I can statements on Thursday, and I can't wait to talk more about it. Bye, 2nd grade. I miss you. I hope that you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon. See ya!